Hi everyone, my name is Puja Guha. I am the author of the Ahriman Legacy along with a few other thrillers. I just came out with my fourth book in the series called Reckoning from the Shadows. This is the book right here. And I wanted to say thank you to the Boulder Bookstore for having me on their YouTube channel. They've set up a few questions for me to answer today.
Yeah, Puja, could you give us a brief synopsis of the series?
Absolutely. So the series starts out, it follows two lead characters. One is a former spy who works for an independent intel organization called The Agency, just The Agency. And she keeps trying to leave the spy life behind for a whole bunch of trauma that's laid out in the first book. And the second protagonist slash antagonist in some of the series is the Ahriman, who is an assassin who's trying to reform himself over the course of the series. So he's done a lot of terrible things and now is on this journey to redemption. And in the first book, their paths collide to stop the assassination of the monarch in Kuwait, and then subsequent books follow their journey together. In this most recent book, they are actually on the hunt for a mole who escaped, an agency mole who was feeding intel to the Russians. And they actually end up embroiled in a military coup plot in Burundi, a country in East Africa.
That sounds amazing. What inspired you to write this series?
The biggest inspiration is definitely that I was a huge reader in the thriller genre, particularly in espionage thrillers. I grew up reading all kinds of books off my dad's bookshelf. Instead of studying for final exams in high school, I was reading Frederick Forsyth and John Grisham and just having a blast. So that broadly always was in the back of my head. I was visiting my parents back in 2008. I was visiting them in Kuwait, where they used to live and where I grew up. And the monarch in Kuwait fired parliament, which happens fairly often. At that time, it had happened about 10 times in 8 years. And Kuwait is a very weird, nuanced political system where you have a very progressive monarch and a really conservative parliament. And so they butt heads all the time. And in that trip, like I said, he fired parliament for the umpteenth time in less than umpteen years. And that got me thinking, in the world of fiction, why wouldn't a member of the most conservative faction, the Islamist faction in Kuwait's parliament, hire an assassin to take out the emir? It would solve a lot of problems for them. And so that was the original plot of the first book, and the characters kind of showed up alongside, and fast forward a few years and now 4 books in.
That's amazing. I am always curious about the research that goes into this. What research did you do to write these books?
So the research is really broad. A lot of the settings are places that I've lived in or where I've had family or friends that have lived, and so that made accessing research a lot easier. Some of it, of course, is online and reading a lot about political nuances in different places, certainly in other settings that have been used across the books in Iran, in Madagascar, in Burundi. And then talking to people is the biggest thing. Talking to people who are from there, who've lived there, all of that kind of thing. And especially for Iran, that's hugely important because sadly that's the one place that's a major setting in my books, certainly in the next book to come. And I don't expect, sadly, that I'll be able to go anytime soon.
Oh. Do you know the twists and turns your thrillers will take before you write them? Or do you just discover them kind of as you write them and then have to figure out an explanation?
The crazy thing is that most authors figure out, okay, they either write what's called in a pantsing style, where they write by the seat of their pants and they figure out all the plot as they write, or they plot it all out beforehand. I have discovered that for me, what works on one book does not work on the next book. And I have to rediscover that process every time. So in my first book in this series, I found out the plot alongside the characters as I wrote it, day by day. This most recent book in the series was a lot more plotted out, although when I took the original outline and started writing it, I had to change a bunch of things. So my process broadly falls in between those two scenarios, but it's different for every book.
That's awesome. Do you have more adventures planned for Petra and the Arhaman?
I do. So I have for sure one more book planned into the series where Petra and the Ahriman will go back to Iran and confront General Majid, who is essentially the creator of the Ahriman icon, this assassin's character who became kind of larger than life because of the attacks he was involved with. And so that for sure will be coming out sometime this year. I actually just finished revisions on it last week.
Yay! So what are a couple books that you read during the pandemic that you really loved?
So this was a tough question for me to answer because there's so many. But I'll narrow it down to two. So I read The New Girl by Daniel Silva, which was my first Daniel Silva book and part of the Gabriel Allon spy thriller series. And I really, really loved it. It reminded me of when I first discovered Frederick Forsyth as a middle schooler off of my dad's bookshelf. Just that deep, just being so drawn into a story and the way he was able to describe setting and the history behind it and all of the nuances of the characters in place. Another book that I really loved is by a good friend of mine who I met at a conference last year, Kyle Mills. It's called Oath of Loyalty. It's part of the Mitch Rapp spy series. Again, another big series that I hadn't discovered before, and so much fun. Lots of action, but lots of great development of character and story. I think this is book 22 of the series, but I had no problem figuring out what was going on. I will be going back and reading more of Kyle's and the original author Vince Flynn's books for sure, but absolutely loved it.
Thank you. Is there anything else that you want us to know about your book?
One thing I'll mention is, so when I first conceived of the idea for this most recent book, Reckoning from the Shadows, I was working a lot in Burundi for my freelance work. And I absolutely fell in love with the place. It's stunning, incredibly beautiful in terms of scenery. You have the Lake Tanganyika in the mountains of East Africa, just beautiful views everywhere you look, greenery, everything. But also the people. It's such a warm place to visit. I made friends my first trip out there within 2 weeks, and then on subsequent trips, which were longer, got to really develop close relationships with them. And so one of the reasons that I set this most recent book in Burundi is I got to go back there. I'm sadly not working there anymore, but it's kind of an extended love letter to the country because I really fell in love with it.
Wow, that's great. We would really love to hear a short passage. Can you read us a short passage from your book, please?
Absolutely. So I'll read right from the first chapter. This scene takes place in New York. It's April 2024. Veronica Salazar reached under her pillow to grab her Colt pistol when she heard a noise by the window. Instead of overtly reacting, she pretended to be asleep, listening intently for any further noise. It could be nothing, but her instincts told her otherwise. For the last 3 months, she'd been moving between agency safe houses, and her nerves were starting to run awry. How long would the FSB be hunting her? She slid out of bed with a quiet sigh. She'd been in the spy game long enough to know that there was no end date in sight. After doing a brief check of her apartment, she was about to get back into bed when she heard a squeak on the wooden flooring just outside her doorway. Reacting on instinct, she stepped to the side and sent her right elbow back with as much force as she could muster. As soon as it made contact, she pivoted to face her adversary, simultaneously sending her left foot out in a front kick. Without waiting to glimpse her opponent, Veronica sidestepped back, reaching forward for the pistol at her bedside. She grabbed the gun and once again heard movement by the doorway, this time sent her left leg wide in a side kick. The combo of the kick and her stretch made her stumble, but she brought the gun to bear, her other hand grabbing the edge of the bed to balance. She reached for the wall with her free hand and flicked on the light switch, keeping the pistol trained at the doorway as light flooded the room. The person she saw standing there made her do a double take. She squinted. Perhaps the bright light had blinded her into thinking he could be there. Her jaw dropped as she realized that she wasn't imagining things. Kevin was indeed standing just a few feet away from her, his gun outstretched. Give me one reason I shouldn't shoot you right now. She fought to keep her voice stern and steady. Veronica, please don't shoot. What the hell are you doing here? I'm here to warn you. I'm putting my gun down, please. Kevin released the hammer and let the gun roll back in his hand before bending and setting it on the floor. Slide it over, no funny business. Once the gun was at the base of the bed, Veronica stood, making sure to keep her pistols trained at his head while she secured the weapon. Her shoulders relaxed after placing it at her back, held in place by the waistband of her shorts. I'm taking you in, she said. How the hell did you find me anyway? The agency got an all-new set of safe houses after you left. You can take me in if you want, but I came here for you. Like I said, I had to warn you. Something in his tone caught her attention, and Veronica found herself wanting to believe him. He had handed over his gun, and he could have killed her earlier. She was tempted to chastise herself. The first noise that she'd heard hadn't been her imagination, but somehow he'd still eluded her. She'd have to address it later and check the next safe house for security holes. At this point, she decided, I might as well let him say his piece. She silenced her doubts. She had him in her sights now anyway. Hand over all your other pieces, and then maybe I'll hear you out. I know about your ankle holster and the knife you keep in your left boot. Kevin caught her eye before retrieving and following the same procedure with both munitions. When they were safely in her grasp, Veronica met his gaze again. On your knees, hands behind your head. You know the drill. All right, out with it. What are you doing here? She blurted out. I had to tell you, the FSB is after you. I'm aware. Why else would I be in a safe house? They're not going to stop, Veronica. Don't you mean you're not going to stop? Last time I checked, you'd joined up with them. I left. Veronica rolled her eyes. That's it? He could have at least come up with a better lie. No matter how much she wanted to believe him, she wasn't going to be tricked again. Please. Why would I come here and put myself at your mercy? You already have all my weapons. Then tell me something I don't know. This is serious, V. Raskazov is determined to catch you, and nabbing an agency operative would go a long way to getting his credibility back in Russia. Getting his credibility back? What are you saying? Did he mean that Raskazov was setting the stage for a coup to take back power? Isn't it obvious? You can't have expected he would just go quietly into the night. That's hardly who he is. Kevin paused. That's why I left, at least in part. You expect me to believe that after years of serving him in secret, you suddenly grew a conscience and decided to jump ship? What kind of an idiot do you think I am? Besides, you can't exactly up and quit the FSB. It's serious, Veronica. If I could find you, it's only a matter of time. his gaze straight towards the window. "You have to let me go. I shook my tail, but I don't want to take any chances, not with you. They knew I'd be able to find you, so I have to disappear now. I'm not asking you to do anything to help me. I have to run. I can't let them find me, but I couldn't disappear without warning you. All I can say is they're coming for you. They don't have this safe house yet because I sent them to a bogus apartment you used to have in Jersey. Otherwise, they would have already found you. Go on, call it in. They're following your trail to Jersey instead of taking us both in custody right now." Her throat quivered. She and Kevin had set up the decoy apartment in Jersey while they were still working together, long before anyone at the agency had realized his betrayal. If it was true he had sent the FSB there, then he was indeed working against them. Why else would he send them to an obvious decoy? Unless this is some kind of elaborate ruse. But that still didn't explain why he would hand over all his weapons, and why he hadn't taken her in when he'd had the chance. Her grip on the gun wavered, but she stopped herself from lowering it. Even if he'd given her enough to merit a modicum of trust, she was hardly ready to let him go. Releasing one hand from the grip panel, Veronica reached for her phone and tapped on screen. She still had the decoy apartment under surveillance. Once the app opened, she caught a glimpse of the clock that she'd specifically hidden in the corner of the camera frame as a trick to pick up on whether the feed had been looped. He's right, she realized. The second hand remained on the 14-second mark. Damn it. You can trust me, V. Why else would I send them there? So what? She said. Why? I still can't trust you. I loved you. I promised that wasn't a lie. I betrayed the agency, but I never gave you up. You have to know the FSB would have found you months ago if I had helped them, but I couldn't let that happen. I could never let them hurt you, but I can't protect you anymore. Have you lost your mind? What do you think this is, some kind of romance novel? You turned your back on everything we believed, everything we worked and stood for. You held Carlos and Petra at gunpoint, for God's sake, and you almost let a bomb go off in the middle of DC. We had to wake up the American government. There was no other way. Besides, I was never going to let the bomb detonate, and I never wanted Petra and Carlos involved in the first place. I didn't have a choice. You didn't have a choice? Veronica looked down at her gun, her grip once again solid. She could end this once and for all. She wasn't sure if she actually could. He wasn't an immediate threat, after all. But she was angry. He had shared her home, shared her bed, and they had talked about sharing a life together. Did knowing what he'd been hiding erase all of those moments, all of those feelings? My feelings for you are real. You can trust in that. Kevin got to his feet. I didn't come here to hurt you, but you have to deal with this threat once and for all. You have to run, get off the grid completely, or neutralize the threat. He straightened up and took a step toward her. They're coming for me. Either shoot me now or let him go. He took another step toward her and stopped when the pistol was pressing against his chest. The seconds dragged by as the debate in Veronica's mind raged. Their eyes remained locked as he placed both hands on hers, then slowly but surely extracted her pistol. She resisted, twisting her hands in the opposite direction, a maneuver she knew well that had been drilled into her at training. Against a normal adversary, she would have been in the clear. The gun would have been back in her control a second later. But the strength in her hands faltered, and it started to slip. He took a step back, lowering it toward his waist, and stopped at the window. I really do love you. He opened the window, stepped out onto the fire escape, and set her pistol on the ledge. When he leaned in to close it, he looked as if he were about to say something. In a movie, he would have waxed poetic about how love transcends all, about how they could still have a life together. In a movie, she could even have forgiven him. "Goodbye, V," he whispered, and disappeared. Veronica kept her eyes fixed on the window, imagining what might have been as she secured the latch from the inside. If someone had asked her what she would do if Kevin confronted her, she would have assured them that she'd take him in, no questions asked. Clearly, she had a different reality to contend with. She slid to the ground with her back up against the bed. This wasn't a movie, but she had still let him go.
That was fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And this was a lot of fun answering these questions. Thank you so much. And thanks again to the Boulder Bookstore.
Thank you. Can we see the cover of that book one more time?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Puja.